story starts with the death of a great prophet and savior. Yes, Jesus Christ was crucified. And yes, he did rise and ascend into the sky in the immediate aftermath of the resurrection. When the scent of dust and miraculous blood still hung heavy over Judea, the world burned with a quiet, terrified heat. Among those set ablaze was Elias. He did not preach with the gentle grace of the apostles. Elias preached like a wildfire consuming dry brush. In the crowded, sun-baked marketplaces, beneath the shadow of Roman garrisons and temple arches, his voice was a whip. He was a man hollowed out by absolute certainty, driven by an intensity that frightened even his fellow believers. It was in a sunlit square outside a small Judean town that Elias crossed the threshold of no return. Standing before a tribunal of bruised elders and outraged scholars, Elias did not merely proclaim the risen Christ, he shattered the ground beneath their feet. "The temple is an empty shell," Elias roared, his shadow stretching long against the hot limestone. "The altars are dry, the old covenant is dead, buried in the tomb your stone could not hold. Blood for blood, sacrifice for sacrifice, the lamb has bled, and your rituals are nothing but dust blown into the wind." A terrible silence fell over the square, swallowed quickly by the harsh, scraping sound of heavy stones being lifted from the earth. The first stone struck Elias square in the chest, shattering ribs with a sickening crack. He fell to his knees, but he did not scream. The second tore open his brow, painting his eyes in thick, iron-scented crimson. As the hail of jagged rock battered his flesh, snapping limbs and bruising organs into pulp, Elias felt an intoxicating euphoria. The agony was a divine privilege. He squeezed his eyes shut against the streaming blood, looked toward the blinding sun, and choked out a final, ecstatic whisper through shattered teeth, "Lord, I am coming." The stones piled high over his broken form. The dust settled. The sun beat down on a cold, mangled corpse. Death was not a passage into golden light. It was a plunge into suffocating darkness. Elias' soul awoke in Sheol, a vast, gray abyss where time lay dead and forgotten. There were no songs of angels, no welcoming embrace, only an endless, freezing twilight where the whispers of forgotten dead drifted like ash. Elias drifted in the numb horror of non-being, his absolute faith wavering for a terrifying fragment of eternity. Where was the throne? Where was the light? Out of the gray mist something moved. It did not walk, it uncurled like a lingering shadow. It was an ancient, predatory intelligence, an entity of cold hunger known in the deep places as Sheolust. Its form was a shifting mass of sunken eyes and needle-like darkness, radiating an agony far older than the earth. Sheolust hovered over the zealous, writhing soul of Elias, smelling the suffocating stench of his fanatical pride. "Look at you," the demon whispered, a sound like dry scales sliding over tomb dust. "Shattered, abandoned, your master sits upon his throne, yet he leaves his most violent hound to rot in the cold." "No," Elias' soul wept, struggling against the weight of the abyss. "I bled for him, and you shall bleed for him still," Sheolust hissed, weaving dark, pitch-black roots into the fabric of Elias' spirit. "You are not finished, martyr. Your master is soft. He speaks of grace, but the world demands iron. He needs a shadow to forge his kingdom. He needs a predator." The demon leaned close, forcing a drop of primordial, corrupted darkness directly into the void where Elias' heart had been. "Rise, Elias, be the red dawn of his church." When Elias opened his eyes, he was beneath the pile of stones, but he was no longer human. The weight that should have crushed him felt like paper. He exploded upward out of the cairn, the night air striking his chest like ice. His body was whole, yet terribly altered. His skin was pale as tallow, his veins black beneath his flesh, and a burning, agonizing fire clawed at the back of his throat. A wild dog padded into the clearing, catching his scent. Elias moved faster than a strike of lightning, tearing the beast open and drinking wildly from its throat. The warmth of the blood rushed through his dead veins, bringing a terrifying, blasphemous clarity. He did not mourn what he had become. In his twisted, monstrous mind, this was not a curse. It was a sacred, holy unction. Christ had died and risen, so had he. Christ had offered his blood for eternal life. Elias would take blood to enforce eternal truth. He was the secret, predatory sanctification of the faith. In the decades that followed, Elias glided through the subterranean gatherings of the early Christians like a ghost. He stalked the dark alleys of Rome, Antioch, and Corinth. When heretics debated the nature of the Savior, or when weak-willed leaders threatened to dilute the message, Elias appeared from the dark. A snap of a neck, a silent drain of blood in a locked room, and the doubt was excised. He fixated upon the writings of Paul of Tarsus. Elias saw Paul as the true, ruthless architect of the church, but even Paul lacked the lifespan to oversee the grand design. Moving unseen through scriptoriums by candlelight, Elias subtly altered texts, pennied whole letters in Paul's name, and inserted razor-sharp doctrines that would burn themselves into the canon of Scripture forever. He was the unseen hand pruning the vine, watering the root of the church with the blood of those who stepped out of line. Centuries bled together into a violent tapestry of growth. Elias watched the faith blossom from a hunted underground cult into the very heart of the Roman Empire. He was there in the shadows of the catacombs, whisper-teaching bishops and nudging imperial decrees. It was during the brutal Diocletianic persecution that Elias entered a damp, suffocating prison cell in Asia Minor. There, chained to a sweating stone wall, sat a young bishop named Nicholas, a man radiating a rare, blinding purity of heart and an iron resolve. Elias stood in the shadows, watching the man pray for his torturers. "Your compassion will burn you to cinders in a world like this, Nicholas," Elias murmured, stepping into the dim moonlight. Nicholas did not flinch at the sight of the pale creature before him. "The Lord's strength is made perfect in weakness." "No," Elias purred, leaning down to Nicholas's ear. "The Lord's strength requires endurance. The world is coming, Bishop. The church will need men who cannot die." With a swift bite, Elias bestowed the red sacrament. Nicholas gasped, his mortality burning away to be replaced by the heavy, immortal pulse of the night. As Nicholas adjusted to his new existence, he offered Elias a token he had recovered from a cryptic journey to the east, a heavy, sealed crystal vial containing a thick, glowing violet liquid. It hummed with an ancient, primordial resonance, smelling of crushed starlight and pre-human soil. "A relic from the primordial garden," Nicholas whispered, his voice dark and newly resonant. "A remnant of the world before the fall." Elias held the violet fluid to the moonlight. He felt its terrifying potential instantly. It was the key to something far greater, a catalyst that could elevate their kind from mere parasites to godlike stewards of the earth. For the next millennium, Elias was a ghost in the machine of Western history. He rode behind the ironclad knights of the Crusades, feeding on the battlefields of Antioch and Jerusalem, convincing himself that the slaughter was a holy perfume. He sat in the quiet study of Wittenberg, subtly stoking the fiery resolve of Martin Luther's inner circle to fracture a corrupt papacy that had grown too soft, too complacent. He was a creature of absolute purpose, believing that every drop of blood he spilled was a brick in the building of the kingdom of God. Yet, as the centuries turned into the 18th century, the world began to exchange divine mysticism for cold, unyielding reason. Elias knew his methods had to evolve. In the mist-shrouded forests of Central Europe, he found his ultimate collaborator, Dr. Valerian Crowe. Crowe was a man who had been cast out of every prestigious medical academy in Europe. He was brilliant, cold, and utterly devoid of moral restraint, driven by a manic desire to pierce the veil between life, death, and evolution. When Elias revealed his true nature, Crowe fell to his knees not in terror, but in absolute, ecstatic worship. "We are not mere men, Doctor," Elias told him, turning Crowe into a creature of the night. "We are the divine clay, and it is time we sculpted the future." Deep beneath an abandoned, crumbling estate in the Carpathian Mountains, they constructed a vast, sprawling subterranean labyrinth, a cathedral of cold iron, glowing glass retorts, and stone slab tables. Here, the holy zealot and the mad scientist began their monstrous alchemy. Using the purple Eden liquid as a master catalyst, they experimented relentlessly on captured vampires, beasts, and human subjects. They spliced, synthesized, and mutated, breeding horrors of terrifying strength and grotesque resilience, hybrids built to withstand daylight, creatures with skin like iron, and beasts that fed on the minds of men. Standing on a high balcony overlooking the laboratory, listening to the echoes of howling experiments and the hiss of boiling chemicals, Elias clasped his pale hands together in prayer. The age of simple martyrs and silent shadows was over. The era of dark, engineered miracles had begun. Now let me introduce you to the Rain family, high in the mist-shrouded highlands of Ethiopia, where ancient stone churches were carved directly into the bones of the earth. Night belonged to the predators. The air was thin, smelling of crushed eucalyptus, cold rain, and the metallic stench of fresh slaughter. Three silhouettes cut through the jagged acacias without making a sound. They were the Rain family, the last true lineage of an ancient order of hunters whose bloodline had policed the border between humanity and the nightmare realm since the days of the kingdom of Arxum. At the front was Markus Rain. Built like an iron pillar, he wore customized tactical armor woven with blessed silver thread and etched with ancient Gia's protection runes. He moved with cold, military precision, his eyes scanning the blood-drenched tall grass. Behind him prowled Darius. Younger, broader, and driven by a volatile fire, Darius gripped a pair of heavy, serrated hunting blades. He didn't just track monsters, he hated them with a personal, roaring fury that Markus was constantly forced to keep on a leash. Bringing up the rear was Angelary, the youngest. While her brothers brought steel and brawn, Angelary was the mind and intuition of the family. Her sharp, amber eyes saw patterns in the dark that others missed. Beneath her leather coat, she carried leather pouches of grave dust, salt, and ancestral charms, her fingers constantly trailing over a heavy iron medallion resting against her throat. Tonight, they were hunting a Buddha, a terrible, ancient strain of Wahina. It was a beast born of a dark regional curse, capable of shifting from a hunchbacked, foul-mouthed human by day into a towering, cackling abomination of bone and muscle by night. For 3 weeks, it had dragged villagers from their mud-brick homes, leaving behind only cracked bones and gnawed skulls under the moonlight. "It's close," Angelary whispered, kneeling to touch a slick, crimson smear on an acacia root. She brought her fingers to her nose and winced. "The blood is stagnant. It's digesting human flesh right now." Darius grinned, a dark, dangerous expression cracking his knuckles. "Let's make it throw it back up." "Patience, Darius," Markus growled softly, unclipping a heavy, silver-plated crossbow from his back. "A Buddha doesn't fight like a wolf. It tricks you. It mimics human voices to lure you into the brush." Before the words fully left his mouth, a chilling sound echoed through the fog-heavy trees. It was a woman's voice, high and terrified, crying out from the darkness ahead. "Help me, please, my legs. It bit my legs." Darius took a half-step forward, but Angelary grabbed his forearm, her grip like a vice. "Listen closely," she muttered. There's a wet, clicking sound under the words. It's using the throat of its last victim. From the canopy above, the fog split. A massive, 8-foot shape dropped onto the dirt with a bone-shattering thud. The beast was an absolute nightmare of biomechanics, a slavering, hunchbacked monstrosity covered in coarse, spotted fur, with jaw muscles so massive they distended its skull. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural, sickly yellow light. It let out a rising, manic laugh that vibrated in the chests of the 3 siblings, a sound designed to paralyze human nerves with primal terror. "Spread out, pattern delta," Markus barked. The fight exploded into violent motion. Buddha lunged for Darius, its massive jaws snapping with enough pressure to crush an engine block. Darius threw himself sideways, rolling over the wet rocks and slashing upward with his serrated blade, biting deep into the beast's flank. Black, foul-smelling blood sprayed across the dirt, but the monster barely registered the pain. It whipped its heavy, clawed tail, catching Darius across the chest armor and launching him 10 feet into a thicket of thorns. "Darius," Angelary yelled. She didn't hesitate. Pulling a pouch of pulverized sea salt and consecrated sulfur from her belt, she threw it directly into the air and kicked it forward with a sweeping motion. The powder ignited in a blinding flash of golden light, burning the Buddha's night-adjusted eyes. The beast shrieked, a horribly human scream of agony, clawing wildly at its face. "Markus, now the throat," Angelary cried. Markus was already moving. He vaulted off a boulder, coming down on the monster's hunched back. He wrapped one armored arm around its snout, forcing its snapping jaws away from his face, while pulling a long, heavy dagger made of forged Ethiopian meteoritic iron and refined silver from his hip. The beast thrashed violently, slamming Markus against the trunk of an acacia tree, cracking his shoulder plate. Markus gritted his teeth, held his ground, and drove the silver blade straight through the underside of the Buddha's jaw, forcing the metal up into its brain stem. The beast stiffened. A long, wheezing gasp escaped its throat, and then it collapsed like a felled oak, pinning Markus beneath its massive weight. Darius hauled himself out of the thorns, spitting blood, and helped Angelary drag the heavy carcass off their brother. Markus sat up, coughing, clutching his bruised ribs, but his gaze remained cold and focused on the dead monster. "Burn it," Markus panted. "Head first. Salt the ashes. If we leave a single bone intact, the local scavengers will turn." An hour later, as the pitch-black carcass crackled in a roaring, blue-flamed bonfire, the sound of thundering hooves broke the silence of the highlands. A foam-flecked horse burst through the tree line, its rider lathered in sweat and dust. The rider slid from the saddle, tumbling to his knees before Markus. He wore the traditional garb of an Egyptian courier, his eyes wide with a deep existential dread. "Are you the Rains?" the courier gasped, clutching a wax-sealed parchment. "Word reached the enclave in Cairo. A contact in Alexandria sent me. You must come at once." Darius wiped black monster blood from his blades onto the grass. "We're a little busy cleaning up our own backyard, friend. You don't understand." The messenger's voice trembled, looking nervously at the shadows beyond the bonfire. "Something terrible is happening at the ports. The black market in Cairo is flooding with illegal exports, but they aren't selling gold or spices. They are moving sealed, iron-bound sarcophagi. Mummies dug up from cursed tombs, crated beasts." The courier leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper, and crates stamped with strange European medical seals, crates that scream from the inside when the ships sway in the harbor. The local guilds tried to open one. Whatever was inside tore 3 grown men to pieces before dissolving into a swarm of ash. Angelary's eyes narrowed. She looked at Markus, her hand instinctively rising to clutch her iron medallion. "That isn't dark magic. That sounds like something synthesized." Markus stood up, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs, and looked north toward the vast, dark horizon where Egypt lay. "Ancient blood, European alchemy, and stolen dead," Markus said softly, his voice heavy with grim realization. "Someone is building an army." He turned back to his siblings. "Pack the heavy gear. We go to Egypt." Now back to Elias. The air inside the subterranean laboratory beneath the Carpathian Mountains was thick with the stench of copper, ozone, and sulfur. Damp stone walls glistened in the flickering illumination of 100-pound tallow candles and the unnatural, throbbing violet light emitted from rows of glass retorts. Dr. Valerian Crowe stood over his work table, his surgical coat stiff with dark stains. He was a tall, gaunt man whose eyes burned with the manic, unholy fever of absolute genius unburdened by human morality. In the darkest corner of the room, where the candlelight died, stood Elias. The vampire moved without sound, his pale skin absorbing the shadows, watching Crowe with the patient intensity of a spider. "You speak of biology, doctor," Elias purred, his voice smooth as velvet and cold as tomb dust. "You speak of tissue, electricity, and nerve endings. But you do not understand the true architecture of creation." Crowe didn't look up from his microscope. "I understand what I can measure. I understand that our kind is merely an infection of the blood, a magnificent, immortal infection, but an infection nonetheless." Elias stepped into the light. From inside his heavy velvet cloak, he produced the crystal vial given to him by Nicholas, a flask sealed with ancient lead, holding a thick, luminous, violet fluid that seemed to swirl with its own internal tide. The air in the laboratory immediately grew heavy, smelling of crushed lotus blossoms and ozone. "Then measure this," Elias whispered softly. Crowe turned, his eyes locking onto the glowing vial. He stepped toward it as if pulled by a physical hook in his chest. What is that?" "A remnant of the first garden," Elias said, his voice dropping into reverent terror. "The divine catalyst, the blood of paradise. It is the clay from which Yahweh sculpted light and flesh. Combined with our immortal nature, it will not merely heal, it will rewrite the canvas of life." Crowe reached out with trembling, gloved fingers, taking the flask. "If this does what you claim, it will give you the power to create gods, Valerian," Elias smiled, "a ghastly, beautiful sight, and I shall give them a purpose." The experiments began that very night. In the deepest vaults of the facility, strapped to heavy iron dissection tables with forged silver chains, were 2 vampires selected for the transformation. They were not helpless victims, they were fanatic acolytes chosen for their distinct, volatile temperaments. The first was Kalen, a cold, calculating creature who had spent 3 centuries stalking the frozen wastes of northern Europe. His mind was an absolute void of emotion, silent and deadly. The second was Ignis, a volatile, murderous brute whose bloodlust was legendary across the Ottoman borders, a creature driven entirely by rage, violence, and burning impulses. Crowe loaded a heavy brass-and-glass syringe with a precisely measured dose of the purple liquid, mixing it with a base of purified vampire blood. "Subject 1, Crowe muttered, plunging the needle directly into Kalen's heart. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Kalen's eyes snapped open, turning an opaque, solid white. The purple liquid did not merely travel through his veins, it violently flash-froze his entire anatomy. An agonizing, metallic screech filled the chamber as Kalen's flesh turned to translucent, diamond-hard ice. The temperature in the laboratory plummeted instantly. Frost rapidly raced across the stone walls, shattering the glass retorts on nearby shelves. Kalen screamed, but the sound was like scraping glaciers. His breath billowed out as dense, freezing clouds. As the silver chains holding him snapped under the expansion of his mutating muscle, Kalen rose. He was no longer a man or a mere vampire. He was a living monolith of frost and death. A howling blizzard whipped into existence around his towering frame, and where his bare foot touched the stone floor, the rock shattered from absolute zero temperatures. He tilted his head, his voice echoing like cracking ice. "I am the frost that swallows the sun. I am Icefire." Crowe, his breath catching in his throat as ice formed on his eyelashes, gasped in manic delight. Magnificent, absolute zero locked within vampiric tissue. Without waiting, Crowe rushed to the second table. Subject 2, he jammed the second syringe into Ignis's chest. Where Kalen frozen, Ignis ignited. The purple catalyst reacted to Ignis's in a rage, causing his blood to violently boil and turn to superheated, liquid magma. Ignis threw his head back and shrieked as his skin cracked open like dry earth, revealing a blinding, orange and purple inferno raging beneath his flesh. The silver chains holding him didn't just break, they instantly melted, dripping onto the floor as liquid slag. Waves of agonizing, suffocating heat blasted through the laboratory. The tallow candles melted into puddles in seconds. Ignis stood up, his body shrouded in towering, roaring pillars of violet-trimmed flame. He hurled his arm forward, releasing a concentrated beam of searing plasma that blew a 5-foot hole clean through the 3-foot-thick stone wall of the vault. Ignis laughed, a terrifying crackling sound like a roaring forest fire. "Burn, let it all burn, I am Vampire." Dr. Crowe stood between the two monstrosities, one generating a sub-zero blizzard, the other radiating a heat that charred the wooden beams overhead, and threw his head back, laughing wildly into the chaos. Elias stepped between the two newly forged abominations. He did not flinch from the biting cold of Icefire, nor did he blink against the blistering heat of Vampire. He looked at them with the tears of a proud father, folding his hands in a solemn, blasphemous prayer. "Behold," Elias whispered, his voice cutting through the roar of fire and ice. "The word made flesh. The age of fragile men is over, Doctor. Together, we have forged the angels of the new world." Crowe stepped beside Elias, staring at the glowing purple vial that still had plenty of catalyst remaining. "We need more subjects," Crowe whispered, a dark, hungry grin spreading across his face. "We need steel, we need flesh, we need the dead. And you shall have them," Elias promised. "The world will bleed, and from its blood our church will rise." The Rain family made it to Egypt. The heat of Egypt was different from the high, crisp winds of the Ethiopian plateau. It was heavy, thick with the scent of salt water, rotting fish, spices, and the ancient, sun-baked limestone of Alexandria. The Rain siblings entered the port city under a moonless sky, moving like three shadows through the labyrinthine, torch-lit alleys of the harbor district. They were draped in dark linen cloaks to cover their tactical gear, though their boots made no sound against the damp cobblestones. They slipped into the back room of a low-ceilinged tea house that reeked of harsh tobacco, sweet tea, and stale sweat. Sitting in the dim corner, clutching a steaming brass cup with trembling, nicotine-stained fingers, was Karim. He was an old man whose face was a map of deep scars, a veteran tomb robber who had spent 40 years digging up the forgotten places of the desert. He was a man who rarely feared the dark, but tonight, his eyes were wide, bloodshot, and darting at every creak of the floorboards. "You came quickly," Karim rasped in a hushed whisper, barely waiting for them to sit before leaning over the low wooden table. "Good, praise God, because what is happening in this harbor is an abomination, even for men like me who rob the dead." Markus pulled back his hood, his cold, calm eyes locking onto the old smuggler. "The messenger said you saw crates moving out of the catacombs." "Not just crates, Rain," Karim hissed, clutching his teeth so tightly his knuckles turned white. "They are clearing out whole tombs, burial vaults that haven't seen light since the Ptolemaic kings, sarcophagi bound in heavy lead and cold iron, mummified remains, wrapped not in sacred linen, but in heavy chains." Karim leaned closer, his voice dropping to a terrified, wheezing breath. "3 nights ago, my boy tried to cut the lock on a crate waiting at Pier 9. He thought it was gold. The moment his chisel touched the metal, the wooden box screamed. Not a human scream, mind you, it was the screech of a dozen tortured souls echoing through the wood. The air around the crate turned so cold my boy's breath froze in his throat. He ran. He hasn't slept since." Darius leaned forward, his hands resting on the hilt of his concealed hunting blades. Who is buying? Foreigners, Karim spat, wincing. Men with pale skin, cold eyes, and long black coats who do not blink. They pay in pristine European gold, and they take the crates north, across the Mediterranean. I can get you onto the docks tonight. An iron-hulled steam vessel is loading the final shipment as we speak, but after that, you are stepping into the dark alone. Show us, Markus said simply. An hour later, the siblings crouched high in the crossbeams of a derelict spice warehouse overlooking Pier 9. Below them, the harbor was bathed in a sickly yellow fog that rolled off the dark water. A heavy black-sailed transport vessel bobbed against the wooden pilings. Guarding the dock were a dozen men, not local mercs, but tall, silent figures dressed in immaculate dark coats, moving with a fluid, terrifying synchronization that marked them immediately as turned. Vampires, Darius muttered beneath his breath, his knuckles whitening as he glared down at the guards. The whole perimeter is crawled with them. Look at the cargo, Angelary whispered, pointing toward the heavy wooden crane. Swinging over the black water was a massive, iron-reinforced crate, wrapped in iron chains, inscribed with glowing, faint violet runes. As the crane lowered the box into the hold of the ship, a sudden, violent thud rocked the crate from the inside. A low, agonizing, metallic shriek echoed through the fog, causing the salt water beneath the ship to ripple violently. The air around Pier 9 instantly dropped 20 degrees. Frost crept across the wet wood of the docks, and the local dockworkers handling the ropes shivered uncontrollably, their faces pale with unnatural dread. The energy is foul, Angelary murmured, her fingers tightening around her iron medallion. It's a mixture of ancient, decayed necromancy and something synthetic, something fresh and boiling with power. It's the purple substance, Markus realized, his jaw setting into a hard line. Whatever is waiting for those ships in the north, it's taking the dead of Egypt and using them as raw material. Darius cracked his neck, a sharp, violent sound in the dark. We cut their throats now, sink the ship. No, Markus commanded, placing a heavy hand on Darius's shoulder. We sink one ship, they send 3 more from a different port. We need the source, we need the mind behind this. Markus looked at Angelary, then back at the ship, as its heavy iron anchors were slowly hauled up from the black water. We board quietly, Markus instructed softly. We stay in the shadows of the lower hold, nestled right beside their screaming crates. We ride this death ship all the way to its destination. Angelary looked north, across the black expanse of the Mediterranean, where distant, dark mountains awaited them. A cold knot formed in her chest, an intuitive warning that whatever they were trailing was far larger, older, and more blasphemous than a simple nest of monsters. Stay sharp, brothers, she whispered, pulling her cloak tight against the unnatural chill drifting off the harbor. We aren't just hunting a beast this time, we are hunting an architect. Without another word, the 3 siblings melted from the rafters, slipping like quiet wraiths into the dark fog toward the departing ship, bound for the Carpathian Mountains and the nightmare domain of Elias and Dr. Valerian Crowe. Back at the subterranean laboratory, it had expanded into a towering cathedral of iron, brass, and whirring clockwork gears. The success of Icefire and Vampire had not satisfied Dr. Valerian Crowe. It had ignited an unquenchable, manic hunger in his mind. In the center of the vault stood a new surgical apparatus, a heavy, hydraulic iron frame suspended over a vat of boiling, purple-tinged oil. Strapped within the frame was a female vampire named Vespera. She was an elite assassin of the old blood, cold and ruthless, who had willingly surrendered her flesh to Crowe's grand vision. With surgical precision and zero anesthesia, Crowe sliced away rotting muscle and bone, forging a hideous, beautiful union between dark biology and mechanical genius. Titanium alloy plates were riveted directly into her spine. Pneumatic pistons replaced her quadriceps, and her left arm was completely amputated at the shoulder, replaced by an intricate brass and steel prosthetic ending in 5 razor-sharp monomolecular claws. Crowe brought the heavy brass syringe forward, filled to the brim with concentrated, pulsating purple Eden liquid. He plunged the needle directly into the main mechanical junction where metal met flesh at her neck. Integration process, initiation, Crowe rasped, his eyes manic. The reaction was blinding. The purple liquid surged through her biomechanical pathways. The violet fluid began weeping from the seams of her steel arm like hydraulic fluid. Her organic eye blazed with predatory red light, while her mechanical eye calibrated with a sharp, pneumatic clickwhir, glowing with an intense, thermal crimson lens. Vespera's back arched, her steel-reinforced spine screaming against the iron frame. She snapped her leather bindings like thread, stepping down from the pedestal with a heavy metallic thud that shook the stone floor. She raised her mechanical arm, the razor claws extending and dripping with viscous, glowing purple oil that hissed as it ate into the stone below. She flexed her fingers, her voice coming out in a chilling, dual-tone synthesis of soft flesh and grinding metal. "Systems, immortal, I am Cyborvamp." Elias stepped forward from the shadow of a stone pillar, folding his hands across his chest, as if gazing upon an icon of the Virgin Mary. Tears of absolute, blasphemous joy glisten in his eyes. "Magnificent," Elias whispered, his voice trembling with religious ecstasy. "You are not merely fixing the broken flesh of man, Doctor, you are carving the vanguard of the heavenly host." Crowe wiped sweat and dark oil from his brow with a blood-stained sleeve, letting out a proud, breathless laugh. A perfect fusion of blood, iron, and paradise. Later that evening, as a freezing storm swept over the Carpathian peaks, Elias stood on the laboratory terrace, looking down at a sleeping, snow-covered mountain village below. "Take the children out to play," Elias said softly to the three monstrosities standing behind him. A serene, fatherly smile graced his pale face. "Let the flock see the shepherd's new rods of correction. Test your limits." The assault on the village was swift, brutal, and terrifying. Icespire descended first. With a sweep of his pale, crystalline arms, a roaring blizzard engulfed the main street. Fountains froze instantly, bursting into jagged spires of ice. Villagers who ran into the streets were frozen solid mid-stride, transformed into glass-like statues of terror. Then came Vampire. He vaulted onto the wooden rooftops, his body bursting into towering pillars of violent violet and orange flame. Thatch and timber detonated into infernos. Heat blasted through the freezing air, melting Icespire's frost into blinding clouds of scalding steam. Through the fog of steam and fire strode the Cyborvamp. Her pneumatic limbs propelled her across the cobblestones faster than a striking viper. Her steel claws whirred, shearing through wooden doors and iron shields like paper. Her mechanical eye locked onto those trying to flee, calculating trajectories with cold, automated cruelty. The village screamed, drowning in a nightmare of fire, frost, and grinding steel. Yet amid the carnage, running toward the horror instead of away, was a strange fat man in a sweeping black velvet coat that was 3 sizes too big. His name was Rick D'Assassino. Rick was not a warrior, a hunter, or a scholar. He was a deeply eccentric, delusional man who had spent months following obscure rumors of the true lords of the night. While the townspeople fled for their lives, Rick stood in the center of the burning, freezing square, his eyes sparkling with absolute, ecstatic glee. "Yes, oh sweet darkness, yes," Rick shouted, sweeping his cheap velvet coat dramatically behind him and striking an exaggerated pose against the backdrop of an exploding house. "My brethren, my true bloodkin have finally revealed themselves." Vampire paused, a stream of molten fire crackling between his fingers, staring at the strange human in sheer confusion. Cyborvamp's mechanical eye whirred as it scanned Rick, labeling him a non-threat with an IQ too low to calculate. Rick paid no attention to their confusion. He puffed out his chest, bared his perfectly normal, blunt human teeth, and lunged at a fleeing villager, biting them furiously on the shoulder. "Fear me, I am the night." Rick bellowed, though the villager simply shoved him into a snowbank and kept running. Rick sat up, wiping snow and coat fuzz from his mouth, grinning wildly at the 3 monstrosities. "A bit tough, but I'm refining my technique, brothers. Lead on, I follow." From that night forward, no matter how fast the hybrids moved or how many bodies they left in their wake, Rick D'Assassino was there, trailing 20 paces behind them, striking dramatic Gothic poses in the moonlight, and fruitlessly trying to bite cows, cartwheels, and passers-by in a desperate attempt to unlock his inner darkness. Back in the subterranean silence of the laboratory, far above the burning village, Elias knelt in a small, candlelit alcove cut directly into the mountain stone. Before him sat a crude wooden cross, stained with dark, centuries-old blood. He clasped his pale, clawed hands together, lowering his head in profound, quiet humility. "Thank you, Lord Christ," Elias whispered, his voice trembling with genuine, heartfelt reverence. "Thank you for allowing this wretched servant to be your instrument in this glorious, violent new age. The blood of paradise flows once more. The gift you have placed in our hands will prune the garden and cleanse the earth." He made the sign of the cross over his chest, rising with a gentle, peaceful smile on his face, a saint in his own mind, entirely at peace with the mechanical, icy, and burning abominations he had just released upon the world. The journey through the treacherous passes of the Carpathian Mountains ended in a jagged valley locked in ice and silence. The Rain siblings crouched on a ridge overlooking a remote, fortress-like village built into the cliffside. It was here that the heavy transport wagons from Alexandria had finally stopped. Under the glare of oil lanterns, heavy wooden crates and iron-bound sarcophagi were being hauled into the yawning mouth of a massive, fortified stone keep on the town's edge, the surface entry to Crowe's subterranean labyrinth. But as the siblings shifted through the deep snow, the air hit them like a physical blow. It reeked of iron, ozone, and stagnant, predatory power. The village was not human. It was a garrison. Dozens of vampires roamed the cobblestone streets with complete impunity. Crouched on rooftops, patrolled the perimeter, and lounged outside taverns, their red eyes burning through the mountain mist, fangs gleaming as they fed on the remains of the local population. "We can't slide past them quietly," Markus whispered, his breath plumbing in the freezing air as he gripped the hilt of his meteoritic iron blade. "The perimeter is completely stacked. There are too many." Darius crouched low, a wild, lethal grin stretching across his face as he unlatched his heavy serrated blades. "Good, I was getting tired of hiding in cargo holds." Angelary drew a pair of silver-plated short swords etched with Gies runes, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows. "Let's remind them why the name Rain still makes monsters bleed." The fight exploded without warning. Markus struck first. He vaulted off the ridge, dropping silently onto a vampire scout perched on a wooden watchtower. Before the creature could hiss, Markus drove a silver dagger straight down through its collarbone into its dead heart. The vampire burst into ash before its body even hit the snow. "Intruders!" a voice shrieked from the square below. The night instantly erupted into madness. Dozens of vampires turned as one, their red eyes flaring, lunging toward the three hunters with terrifying, unnatural speed. "Pattern Omega, hold the center," Markus roared, stepping into the breach. Markus fought like an unstoppable machine. His silver blades flashed in wide, brutal arcs in the moonlight, decapitating two vampires in a single sweeping motion. When a heavy brute tried to tackle him, Markus caught the creature by the throat, spun, and slammed it face-first into a stone wall, driving a consecrated stake through its spine. Darius brought raw, terrifying violence. He waded into the thickest part of the swarm like a hurricane of steel. A vampire lunged for his throat. Darius caught its wrists, twisted until the bone shattered through the skin, and used the creature's own body as a battering ram to clear a path. His serrated blades whirred, carving through flesh and bone, painting the pristine white snow in dark, smoking crimson. Angelary moved like smoke. She didn't fight with brute force. She fought with lethal geometric precision. She vaulted off Darius's back, spinning midair to slash the eyes out of three approaching predators. As she landed gracefully on the cobblestones, she whipped out leather pouches of grave dust and salt, kicking it into the faces of those trying to flank her, blinding them long enough to execute them with precise silver thrusts to the heart. The street filled with the sound of clashing steel, feral shrieks, shattering wood, and the thunder of hunter war cries. Body after body turned to ash or hit the freezing dirt. Yet for every vampire the Rain siblings cut down, three more seemed to spill out from the iron gates of the keep. The sheer weight of numbers was staggering, pushing the three hunters back to back in the center of the drenching red snow. "They're trying to drown us in bodies," Darius barked, wiping vampire blood from his face as his blades bit into another foe. "Let them try," Angelary yelled, her swords weaving an impenetrable net of silver light around them. High above, deep within the warm, sulphurous depths of the subterranean laboratory, Dr. Valerian Crowe and Elias stood over new surgical slabs, surrounded by bubbling glass vats and the cold, glowing purple fluid. They were completely unaware that at their very doorstep, the bloodline of the world's most dangerous monster hunters had just unleashed hell. Deep within the lowest vault of the subterranean complex, far beneath the screams echoing on the surface, sat a tomb sealed with lead and salt. Elias led Dr. Valerian Crowe into the freezing chamber. On a slab of black granite lay an ancient sarcophagus, its surface covered in worn Ptolemaic hieroglyphs. Inside rested an Egyptian mummy, its linen wrappings dark with dry rot, its face obscured by a faded gold death mask. Elias reached down, his pale fingers wrapping around a heavy lapis lazuli amulet resting on the mummy's chest. He closed his eyes, his voice echoing in a low, guttural, pre-flood dialect that caused the dust on the floor to dance. The amulet flared with an unholy, violet luminescence. The temperature in the vault plummeted. Slowly, with the dry, scraping sound of brittle parchment, the bandaged fingers twitched. The chest heaved with a dry, hollow breath. The ancient eyes snapped open beneath the wrappings, blazing with a cold, malevolent, undead intellect. An ancient soul bound to flesh, Elias murmured in reverent awe. Without hesitation, Elias produced a syringe containing a murky black viral strain, an engineered necromantic pathogen he had spent decades refining. He jammed it directly into the creature's withered neck. Then, leaning down with a fanatic's passion, Elias sank his long fangs deep into the mummy's throat, pouring his own ancient vampire blood into the corpse while draining its preserved essence. When Elias finally pulled back, dark blood dripping from his chin, the mummy's body expanded. Muscles reconstituted. Black veins bulged beneath the ancient linens. The creature threw its head back, letting out a horrific, rasping shriek that sounded like two dry grinding stones. "This is the raw canvas, Doctor," Elias purred, his eyes gleaming with mad, divine conviction. "Use your science. Use the purple blood of paradise. Rebuild this ancient king. Make it an unstoppable legion in a single body. Turn it into the greatest weapon Christ could ever wield." Crowe stepped forward, his gloved hands trembling with ecstatic anticipation as he stared at the newly born Egyptian zombie. It will be a masterpiece of necrotic engineering. Before Crowe could begin his first incision, the heavy oak doors of the lab burst open with a loud bang. In stumbled Rick D'Assassino, dramatically out of breath, clutching his ribs, his oversized velvet coat flapping wildly around his ankles. "My dark lords," Rick gasped, striking a wide-legged, theatrical pose against the doorframe. "Terrible news from the surface. Vampire hunters, 3 of them, a whole family of relentless assassins. They're slaying our brethren in the streets. They threaten the grand dark cause." Elias turned slowly. A serene, almost beatific smile spread across his pale face. "Vampire hunters," Elias mused softly, clearly amused by the concept. "How delightful. The Lord provides a fire to test our steel." He placed a hand on Rick's shoulder, patting him like a proud father. "Doctor, continue your holy work. I shall take our children out to play once more." Elias gestured grandly, and behind him, the freezing air of Icepire, the suffocating heat of Vampire, and the hydraulic whirring of Cyborvamp stepped into formation. Rick puffed out his small chest, marching alongside them with an intense, ridiculous scowl, utterly convinced he was leading the strike force. As they ascended the stone stairs, Elias clasped his hands, whispering softly into the dark, "Thank you, Lord, for sending new enemies to sharpen our faith." On the surface, the battle had taken a heavy toll. For 3 straight hours, the Rain family had carved through dozens of vampires. Exhausted, covered in black blood and ash, their weapons chipped, and their holy water supplies running dangerously low, they had barricaded themselves inside a ruined, 2-story stone apothecary on the edge of the village square. Markus stood near the cracked window, his silver blade resting against his leg as he surveyed the quiet, corpse-strewn streets. Darius paced the floorboards like a caged panther, wiping sweat and blood from his brow, while Angelary sat on an overturned crate, tightly pulling a linen bandage over a deep claw wound on her forearm. "We've cleared nests across 3 continents," Markus said quietly, his voice raspy from smoke. "We've never seen this many turned in one place. They aren't acting like wild beasts, they're being deployed." "They're guarding something down there," Darius growled, checking his last serrated throwing knife. "And whatever it is, it stinks of that purple liquid." Before Markus could respond, Angelary's breath hitched. Her eyes widened as she looked past Markus, out into the snow-covered square. "Look," she whispered, her voice tightening. Down the moonlit street walked a single figure. He moved not with the predatory twitching of a monster, but with the calm, gentle confidence of a saint walking toward an altar. Elias walked in the center. Flanking him were 3 abominations that made the hairs on Markus's neck stand up. On the left, a towering monolith of living, translucent ice, frost expanding across the cobblestones with every heavy step. On the right, a burning nightmare wreathed in violent, violet-trimmed fire that melted the snow 6 feet around him before his feet even touched the ground. Beside Elias moved a terrifying fusion of pale flesh and heavy titanium, her mechanical eye clicking and whirring. Her brass and steel claws dripping with glowing purple oil and trailing 3 paces behind them, trying desperately to copy their terrifying struts, was Rick D'Assassino, a short, fat, bald man in a sweeping black coat, striking dramatic Gothic poses, baring his blunt teeth at the empty air, and muttering dark, absurd threats under his breath. Darius's eyes locked onto Elias. That's him. That's the shepherd. Markus gripped his blade until his knuckles bled white, sensing the staggering, ancient weight of the creature leading the group. This isn't just a nest, brothers. This is an army, and he thinks he's on a crusade. Angelary stood up, drawing her twin silver short swords, her stance unwavering despite her injuries. Then let's show him what happens to crusaders. Outside, Elias stopped in the middle of the snow-covered square. He looked up at the second-story window of the apothecary, his smile serene, peaceful, and absolutely terrifying. The Rain family prepared for round two. Inside the two-story apothecary, the air was thick with the tang of copper, sweat, and burnt sage. The Rain siblings had worked fast. Thick oak beams were jammed beneath the door frames, windows were nailed shut with heavy floorboards, and every crack, sill, and keyhole was sealed with thick lines of warded salt, crushed silver, and holy oil. They sat in the dim lantern light, catchments of breath heavy in their chests, tending to shredded armor and notched steel. Then came the sound, not a violent ramming, not a claw scraping against the grain. It was three polite, measured, rhythmic knocks on the front door. Tap, tap, tap. The siblings froze. Markus held up a single, blood-stained, gloved hand, signaling absolute silence. He rose like a shadow, his knuckles white around the hilt of his meteoritic iron blade, and slunk toward the barricaded door, pressing his side against the heavy wood. Outside, bathed in the pale, cold moonlight of the square, stood Elias. His arms were folded neatly behind his back, his posture straight, his expression radiant with an almost gentle, pastoral warmth. "Good evening," Elias called out through the wood, his voice smooth, resonant, and entirely lacking in predatory malice. "I am a humble servant of our Lord Christ. I was merely wondering, have you fine people heard the good news tonight?" From inside the gloom, Darius leaned against a structural beam, his face contorted in sheer disgust as he spit a mouthful of dark blood onto the floorboards. "Fuck off," Darius snarled. Angelary stepped up beside Markus, her short swords drawn, her voice dropping into a razor-cold register that cut through the drafty cracks in the wall. "We know exactly what you are, monster, and we know 47 different ways to make your kind burn." Elias chuckled softly, a warm, rich sound that sounded eerily like a priest sharing a light moment with his congregation after Mass. "Ah," Elias murmured, nodding his head approvingly. "So you do possess some knowledge of my kind, a rare treat in these dark times." He tilted his head, his sharp eyes taking in the silver nails and glowing salt lines creeping out from beneath the threshold. "I noticed you sealed every single opening. Salt, silver, warded iron. Very smart, very meticulous. Truly, I admire the craftsmanship of the Rain bloodline." He took one step closer to the door, his shadow stretching long and dark across the pristine white snow of the porch. His serene smile widened, pulling back his pale lips to reveal long, needle-sharp fangs glinting like polished bone in the night. "But you do realize," Elias whispered, his voice dripping with absolute divine certainty, "you know you're all going to die tonight, yes?" Inside the darkened house, Darius threw his shoulders back, his chest heavy as he hurled his voice through the heavy oak door. "Yeah, well, we've put down worse than you, blood-sucking freak. Come try it." Outside, Elias' laughter drifted through the cracks, a rich, genuine sound entirely devoid of anger. "Bold words," Elias purred, tilting his head as he admired the silver wire and salt lines visible through the doorframe. "I respect that immensely. Most men beg by now. Most men cry for their mothers or pray to a god who cannot hear them in the dark. You've done your research. Every window shuttered, every sill warded. Very professional. But tell me, Hunter, how long do you truly think you can last in a cage of your own making?" Markus adjusted his grip on his meteoritic blade, his eyes never leaving the iron deadbolt as he answered, cold and unyielding, "Long enough for the sun to rise and burn you and your pets to ash." Elias' smile widened, pulling back his pale lips to reveal glistening fangs. "Oh, my dear child, I am the light that burns." He turned casually, waving a pale, ringed hand toward the short, bald figure shivering in his sweeping black coat. "Rick, be a dear and clear the entryway for our hosts." Rick D'Assassino puffed out his chest, his eyes bulging with dramatic, self-important fury. He tossed his long coat back with a flourish, striking a terrible stance. "With absolute pleasure, my dark lord," Rick declared, barking like a mad dog as he lunged forward, grabbing the iron latch and yanking the heavy door inward. The wards shattered. The salt line broke. Before the door even hit the interior wall, the hybrids unleashed hell. Vampire breached first, roaring as his body detonated into a blinding vortex of violet-tinted flame, heat melting the doorknob instantly as he surged straight for Markus. Icefire followed, a freezing gale sweeping into the foyer, frosting the floorboards in a split second as jagged shards of ice blasted toward Darius like crossbow bolts. Cyborvamp burst through the lingering smoke, her internal hydraulics screaming, her synthetic red eye locking onto Angelary with terrifying mechanical precision. Through the carnage, Elias stepped over the shattered threshold, his hands neatly behind his back as he began to pace the burning entryway. "Come now, children of the rain," Elias taunted softly, his voice cutting through the roar of flames and whirring gears. "Show me the strength of your blood. Show me why I should not tear your souls from your flesh." Behind them, Rick tumbled into the living room, flailing his arms wildly in a terrible imitation of martial arts. "I'll suck your blood dry, fear the night." Rick shrieked, swinging wildly at the empty air, tripping over a low coffee table and violently crashing into a wooden china cabinet, burying himself in shattered porcelain. The interior of the house instantly turned into a meat grinder. Markus met Vampire in the center of the parlor. The fire vampire hurled torrents of roaring heat, charring the wallpaper and threatening to consume the room in seconds. But Markus was a ghost in the smoke. Utilizing his tactical conditioning, he rolled beneath a sweeping backhand of solid fire, feeling his eyebrows singe in the heat. As Vampire turned to blast him again, Markus whipped out a heavy silver stake, driving it straight through the creature's burning left shoulder. The beast shrieked as the silver reacted with its corrupted blood. Markus didn't give it a second chance. He spun on his heel, his meteoritic blade flashing in an arc that severed Vampire's head cleanly from its neck. The burning corpse collapsed into a mound of dying embers and black ash. Across the hall, Angelary engaged Cyborvamp. The mechanical nightmare's titanium claws shredded the walls, turning the furniture into toothpicks as her crimson eye tracked Angelary's every breath. But Angelary didn't rely on strength. She fought with lethal, acrobatic geometry. She leaped off the wall, dodging a thrust that buried metal claws deep into the floorboards. Sensing the machine's weak point, Angelary vaulted straight onto Cyborvamp's shoulders, wrapping her legs around the construct's neck. With a brutal reverse grip thrust, she slammed her short sword directly into the glowing red central core in the creature's chest. She wrenched the blade sideways, ripping the pulsating core out with a spray of sparks and black oil. Cyborvamp twitched violently, her mechanical eye flickering out before her massive body hit the floor like a sack of scrap iron. In the dining room, Darius fought Icefire with sheer, unadulterated violence. The ice hybrid blasted freezing wind, encasing Darius's boots in solid frost and launching razor-sharp icicles that sliced open his shoulders. Darius roared, surging through the cold with raw, furious strength. He shattered the ice around his legs, ducked beneath a frozen hammer fist, and grabbed Icefire by the throat and scalp. With a terrifying battle cry, Darius drove the creature's face straight down into the hardwood floor over and over, until the ice hybrid's head shattered into 100 frozen, lifeless fragments. The house went deathly quiet, save for the crackle of burning rug and the heavy, ragged gasps of the three siblings. Standing amidst the ash, scrap iron, and shattered ice, Markus, Angelary, and Darius turned as one toward the doorway, their blades dripping with black blood, ready to face the master. They never saw him move. Elias blurred. He didn't run, he simply ceased to be in the doorway and appeared directly in front of Darius. Before Darius could even raise his blades, Elias locked an iron grip around his throat, tilting the hunter's head back with terrifying, ancient force. With a soft, satisfied sigh, Elias sank his fangs deep into Darius's carotid artery. Darius gasped, his eyes going wide as Elias drank greedily, his pale throat swallowing the dark, hot blood of the Rain family. Darius let out a strangled roar of pain, his eyes rolling back as Elias' fangs dug deeper into his neck. He thrashed violently, attempting to slam his elbow into the ancient creature's ribs, but Elias held him effortlessly, a python crushing a wolf. Markus and Angelary lunged forward with twin cries of fury, silver blades flashing in the firelight. Elias moved with terrifying, fluid grace, using Darius's massive body as a human shield, spinning him into their line of sight while continuing to swallow greedily. "You fight with such exquisite passion," Elias murmured against Darius's torn flesh, his voice smooth and unnervingly calm. "It is almost a shame to break you, but in the end, every knee shall bow, you will serve a higher purpose." With a desperate, agonizing surge of strength, Darius buried his knife into Elias' hip. Elias grunted in mild annoyance, letting go just enough for Darius to tear himself free. Blood spilled down Darius's chest, his skin turning a sallow, necrotic gray as the ancient venom began its slow, agonizing crawl through his bloodstream. He staggered back into Markus and Angelary, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The three siblings formed a defensive triangle, bruised, bloody, and desperate, ready to throw their lives away to take Elias down. Before they could take a single step, the entire eastern wall of the house exploded. Dust, splintered oak, and heavy stone flying inward as a cloud of debris filled the parlor. Through the gaping hole stepped Dr. Valerian Crowe, his lab coat splattered with dark fluid, his face twisted in a manic, triumphant grin. "It is complete," Crowe shrieked over the ringing in their ears. "Feast your eyes upon the dawn of evolution." Out of the dust cloud charged the Egyptian Vampire. It didn't move like a decaying corpse. It moved like a battering ram forged in hell. Bound in hardened, resin-soaked linens and draped in heavy obsidian and gold armor, the hybrid slammed into the Rain family like a freight train. The impact sent all three hunters flying across the room, smashing through tables, chairs, and plaster wallboards. Elias stepped back into the doorway, casually wiping a line of fresh blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. His serene smile returned, radiant and utterly devoid of mercy. "Look at him, my children," Elias taunted softly as Darius struggled to stand. "The sacred rot is taking hold. Soon your beloved brother will march alongside us, a glorious, blood-soaked apostle in Christ's ultimate army." Meanwhile, amidst the rubble and flying plaster, Rick D'Assassino was still flailing his arms wildly, stamping his feet in a terrible, stomping dance. "I'm assisting, I am the shadow in the night. Fear my dark power, mortals," Rick screamed, swinging a heavy punch at a fallen coat rack, missing completely and tumbling headfirst into a pile of broken drywall. The Egyptian Vampire was an absolute juggernaut. It manhandled the Rain family with sickening ease. Markus scrambled to his feet, raising his blade to parry, but the creature's bandaged fist struck him square in the chest, cracking the oak studs behind him as he slammed into the wall. Angelary attempted an overhead strike, vaulting off a beam, but the Vampire caught her out of the air by her throat and hurled her violently across the parlor, sending her crashing through a heavy oak bookshelf. Darius, fighting the black poison burning in his veins, let out a guttural scream and tackled the monster's legs. The Vampire didn't even flinch. It backhanded Darius with enough force to lift him off his feet, sending him skidding across the floorboards into a shattered display case. Dr. Valerian Crowe stood beside Elias in the breach, wringing his gloved hands in ecstatic worship. "Magnificent, sublime," Crowe cackled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "The perfect convergence of pre-flood rot, viral synthesis, and the blood of paradise, my ultimate masterpiece." Elias folded his arms, giving a single, polite nod of approval. "A fine vessel for the holy wrath, Doctor." But the Rain family had not survived centuries of nightmare hunts by giving up. Coughing up blood, Markus forced himself up. His sharp eyes scanned the Vampire's relentless assault, the slight delay in its rot-stiffened left knee, the glowing, pulsing lapis lazuli amulet embedded deep within its chest wrappings, and the delicate, dried resin holding its neck bandages together. "The amulet! Break its chest, sever the neck," Markus roared. Now, trained by a lifetime of shared combat, the siblings moved as one mind. Angelary scrambled up from the wreckage, drawing the Vampire's focus with a flurry of throwing daggers that sparked harmlessly against its faceplate. As the beast turned to crush her, Darius hurled himself forward, pinning the monster's left side in a desperate, bone-snapping tackle. The Vampire hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all Markus needed. Markus lunged, his meteoritic blade glowing with friction as he drove it straight into the lapis amulet, shattering the ancient focal point. The Vampire let out an otherworldly, screeching howl as black fire erupted from its chest. With a final, agonizing swing, Markus swept his blade across the creature's exposed neck. The head detached, spinning through the air before hitting the floorboards. The colossal body collapsed into a lifeless heap of decaying linen, ancient dust, and rusted iron. Silence fell over the ruined house, broken only by Dr. Crowe's ear-splitting shriek of unadulterated horror. "No, no, my masterpiece, my beautiful son." Driven mad by the destruction of his life's work, Crowe lost all reason. He drew two massive, brass syringes filled with bubbling, mutated green and purple fluids, screaming as he charged the Rain family himself like a feral beast. Elias watched the mad scientist sprint toward three seasoned, bloodthirsty hunters who had just put down a god. He didn't raise a finger. His smile remained serene, almost pitying. "It seems we have overstayed our welcome," Elias whispered to the night air. Without a word of warning, without looking back at Crowe or Rick, Elias turned. He blurred into a shadow, stepping through the broken wall and disappearing seamlessly into the dark forest beyond, leaving his creations to pay the butcher's bill. Dr. Valerian Crowe didn't even make it 3 steps. Before the mad scientist discharged his bubbling brass syringes, Angelary sidestepped his desperate lunges with razor-sharp precision. With a swift, merciless thrust, she drove a heavy silver stake straight through his sternum, pinning his heart to his spine. Crowe gasped, his eyes bulging in sheer, unadulterated shock as the silver reacted with his corrupted blood. Black smoke hissed from his lips, his skin shriveling like burnt paper before he collapsed onto the blood-soaked floorboards, dead, his mad genius reduced to ash and rot. Markus and Angelary didn't pause to celebrate. They spun around, their eyes locking onto Darius. Their brother was slumped against the ruined plaster wall, clutching his neck. Blood poured through his fingers, but it was no longer red. It was thick, black, and smelled of cold iron and grave dirt. His skin had turned a sallow, necrotic gray, and dark, web-like veins crept up his jawline toward his hollowed eyes. "Darius," Angelary whispered, her voice cracking as she rushed to his side. Darius looked up, his breathing a shallow, wet rattle. His irises flickered with a faint, predatory red, the dark bloodlust already clawing at the back of his mind. "End it," Darius rasped, his teeth already lengthening into needle-sharp fangs. "Before I turn, before I become a monster like them, please do it now." Markus stepped forward, tears welling in his tired eyes as he raised his meteoritic blade, his hands trembling. Angelary brought her silver stake high, her chest heaving as she prepared to kill her own blood. Before either of them could drive the steel home, the air grew violently cold. The pools of crimson spilled across the floorboards, the splatters covering the walls, and the soaked furniture began to hum with a terrifying, liquid resonance. The blood broke the laws of gravity, pooling upward in thick, floating ribbons. It swirled into a blinding vortex of crimson and light, congealing into a towering, magnificent, and terrifying entity. The blood angel materialized before them. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, he possessed skin like marble, eyes like burning rubies, and massive, sweeping wings composed entirely of living, flowing blood that dripped upward toward the ceiling. "Hold your steel, hunters," the angel's voice echoed, resounding not in their ears, but in the very marrows of their bones. "I am a watcher of the shadowed things that creep upon this earth." Markus and Angelary froze, paralyzed by the sheer, suffocating holy pressure radiating from the entity. The angel looked down at Darius, who was convulsing on the floor as the ancient vampire venom consumed his soul. With a movement smoother than shadow, the blood angel reached into the coat pocket of Dr. Crowe's lifeless corpse, retrieving the heavy crystal vial containing the glowing, violet fluid of the primordial garden. Without a word, the angel forced Darius's mouth open and poured the glowing Eden liquid down his throat. Darius arched his back, a guttural, agonizing scream tearing from his lungs as his entire body ignited with violet static. His skin darkened to a deep black copper, and his pale hair transformed in an instant, turning the shade of freshly spilled blood. The necrotic black veins receded. The wild, ravenous hunger in his eyes cleared, replaced by a deep, terrifying, and absolute clarity. The transformation was complete. He was a vampire, yet his soul remained untouched by the abyss. He was whole. The blood angel lowered his glowing hand, speaking with ancient, unshakable authority. "The waters of the Eden River do not invent evil, hunter. They merely magnify the absolute truth of the soul that drinks them. These creatures were tyrants of pride, and so they became monsters. Your brother's heart is a shield for the innocent, and so he shall remain." The blood angel turned his burning, ruby gaze away from Darius, fixing his sight directly upon Angelary. The pressure in the room shifted, focusing entirely on her as her shadow stretched long against the floorboards, taking on a strange, majestic shape. "And you, daughter of the night," the angel murmured, his voice softening into a rhythmic, ancient chant, "you carry a crown you have never worn." Angelary stood frozen, the silver stake still clutched tightly in her pale fingers. "What are you talking about?" "Carry the bloodline of the First Mother," the blood angel revealed, his crimson wings fanning out to fill the entire room. "You are a direct descendant of Lilith, For generations, that ancient primordial fire has slept in your veins, diluted by the quiet years. But the blood shed tonight has broken the seal. Angelary stared at her own hands. Beneath her skin, she could feel a strange hum of ancient power waking up, a deep, dark arcana that felt entirely natural, yet terrifyingly vast. Your lineage grants you authority over forces this world has forgotten, the angel continued, extending a huge marble-white hand wrapped in living blood toward her. Power that mere humans can never hope to comprehend. But a greater war approaches, a conflict that will shatter the foundations of the heavens and bring the war of the evil Yahweh back to the realm of men. You are not meant to die in this dust, Angelary. I offer you the ascension. I will teach you to command the blood of your mother. Angelary turned her head, looking back at her brothers through the swirling red mist. Darius, breathing heavily, stood tall on his new immortal legs. He gave her a solemn, approving nod. Markus, his face pale and worn with the grief of losing his family to the strange tides of the cosmos, met her eyes. He didn't speak, but his respectful nod said everything. She turned back to the entity. Angelary let her silver stake fall to the floor, where it clattered against the wood. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice firm, cold, and entirely devoid of fear. Angelary reached out and clasped the blood angel's hand. In a blinding, roaring explosion of crimson light, liquid fire, and feathers, the space folded in on itself. When the smoke and dust cleared, the room was empty, leaving only Markus and Darius standing amidst the ruined house. The blinding crimson light faded, leaving behind only the smell of ozone, copper, and scorched pine. The room was deathly quiet, save for the settling dust and the soft dripping of liquid from the broken ceiling joists. Out from behind an overturned dining chair scrambled Rick D'Assassino. He brushed drywall dust from his velvet coat, his face red, his chest puffing out with absurd, theatrical indignation. "That wasn't a real angel," Rick shrieked at the empty air, waving his hands wildly. "Angels don't exist. Everyone knows that. That was just some cheap street magician doing sleight-of-hand tricks with smoke and mirrors. I should know. I'm a creature of the dark. I'm a real vampire, and I perform actual dark arcana." Markus wiped the black blood from his meteoritic blade, his face completely devoid of emotion. Beside him, Darius, his eyes glowing faintly red, his new immortal breath completely silent, looked at the delusional little fat man standing among the decapitated hybrids and ruined machinery. Neither brother said a word. Markus sheathed his sword with a quiet click. Darius adjusted his coat collar over his healed neck bite. Together, the two brothers turned their backs on Rick, stepping over the shattered oak threshold and walking out into the quiet, cold mountain night. Behind them in the wreckage, Rick's faint, delusional shouting faded into the distance as he continued to strike dramatic poses for an audience of corpses. The Rain brothers made the long journey back south, leaving behind the scarred mountains of Europe to return to where their legacy began, the high, mist-shrouded plateaus of Ethiopia. For many years, the highlands sang of two brothers who walked the line between life and death. Markus brought the tactical wisdom of a master hunter, while Darius brought the terrifying, immortal strength of a righteous blood drinker. Side by side, they purged the country of Buddha curses, subterranean horrors, and stray warlords, ensuring that the innocent could sleep under the African stars without fear. They became legends, names whispered in reverence around village fires from Aksum to the Blue Nile. But mortality remains a human debt. Decades bled away, and time eventually claimed Markus' reign. He passed away peacefully in his sleep atop the highlands he loved, surrounded by the generations of people his family had died to protect. Darius stood over his brother's stone grave in silence, the only one who did not age, watching the sun rise over a world that was moving on without its greatest protector. With Markus gone, Darius' reign melted into the shadows of history. He became a ghost, a phantom hunter stepping through the centuries. Beneath his coat, resting close to his beating, immortal heart, he always carried a small, lead-sealed vial filled with the glowing, violet fluid of Eden, his sacred anchor, a reminder of his humanity, and a quick remedy should the dark bloodlust ever threaten to consume his mind. Centuries slipped by like sand. Empires fell, cities grew tall and choked on smoke, and ancient magic gave way to machines and concrete. Eventually, the world forgot the old horrors. But new ones rose in their place. A chaotic era governed by a mutating energy drink called Jekyll Juice, where mutated men played God, and a legendary warrior from the stars named Captain Tougharm fought his final tragic battle against the darkness. When the dust settled and the world grieved its fallen hero, a shadow moved in the dark alleyways of the modern world. Darius stepped into the neon light, his red hair catching the glow of a broken billboard, his hand resting gently against the vial in his pocket. The story was far from over.